I graduated from high school last year, and that's when the story I'm about to share took place. Easter has always been a fun time for my friends and me, but not for the reasons you might think. We've outgrown those childish Easter egg hunts, and I honestly cringe when my parents make me join one with my younger cousins. A few years ago, I can't remember exactly when my friends and I came up with a fun twist on the typical egg hunt. We created our own game that's a mix of manhunts and an Easter egg hunt. It's 2 teams, like in manhunts, but the seekers also have to hide and protect a few eggs. If the hiders manage to capture all the eggs, they win. And if the seekers don't find all the hiders within a certain time frame, the hiders win too. There are some extra rules, like how seekers can't camp near the eggs, but that's not crucial to the story. It was the Thursday before Easter, and school was canceled the next day for some reason, so we decided to have a sleepover that night. It was me, Jake, Race, Chuck, Arthur, and Raz. Raz wasn't his real name. His last name was Razzie, but everyone called him Raz. His family had the biggest house, so we always hung out there. He lived in the middle of nowhere, and his backyard bordered a nice wooded area. Plus, his parents were out of town until Friday night, so we'd have the place to ourselves. We were just hanging out, playing video games in his basement, when Chuck suggested we play Manhunt. Everyone was on board, so we gathered up flashlights from Raz's garage. We used a random number generator on Jake's phone to pick teams, keeping it fair and unpredictable. I was on a team with Chuck and Raz, while Jake and Arthur were hiding. Raz's mom had a bunch of plastic eggs upstairs, so we took a few and headed outside. We'd played in that yard many times, so we knew the layout well. The far boundary was the fence line, with a creek and a slope leading down to Raz's neighbor's horse pasture. We set timers on our phones to give the hiders enough time to hide and ourselves time to stash the eggs. Once 10 minutes passed, the game officially began. Oh, and I should mention that while the sun had set, it wasn't completely dark yet. We all split up to cover more ground. I veered left into a dense patch of trees while Raz and Chuck went the other way. I kept my hand over my flashlight, skimming the ground every few steps to avoid tripping, but I mostly relied on the moonlight. The game was much more fun when it felt like you were sneaking around. Plus, if any of the hiders saw a flashlight beam coming toward them, they would just take off. A few minutes in, I thought I saw something move about 20 or 30 feet ahead. At first, I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but then I spotted it again. I immediately turned off my flashlight and froze. Someone was crouching behind a tree. Whoever it was must not have seen me, otherwise they would have bolted. They were completely still, and I guessed it was Race, who always picked spots close to the seekers, thinking no one would expect it. I decided to sneak up on him. I crouched down and moved slowly to circle around behind him. When I got close enough, I lunged forward, tapped him hard on the shoulder and yelled, "Gotcha!" But as soon as he turned around, a wave of fear washed over me. It wasn't one of my friends. It was a grown man with slicked back hair and wide open eyes, as if he were on drugs. His clothes were torn, and he smelled terrible. I was so shocked that I didn't even react immediately. Before I could do anything, he tackled me to the ground. I screamed as I hit the dirt, but before I could yell again, his hands were around my throat, pressing down with all his weight. At that moment, I genuinely thought my life was over. I couldn't breathe and lacked the strength to overpower him. Then, out of nowhere, he stopped. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flashlight beam bouncing off the trees behind us. One of my friends must have been running toward us. The man must have seen the light too, because he jumped up without a word and ran straight into the woods, disappearing almost instantly. I lay there gasping for air, too stunned to move. A few seconds later, Chuck reached me, helped me up, and said he saw the whole thing. I wanted to chase after that guy, but Chuck insisted that was a terrible idea, so the two of us ran back toward the house. Chuck called the rest of the group and told everyone to return to Raz's house immediately. Once we all reconvened, I recounted what had happened, and Chuck filled in the gaps. As everyone started talking over each other, Arthur said something that silenced us all. He mentioned that before the game even started, before the initial 10 minutes were up, he saw 2 people walking through the trees near where he was hiding. They were moving slowly, like they were scouting or waiting for something, and he had gotten annoyed because he thought it was 2 seekers breaking the rules. Chuck, Raz, and I exchanged glances and shook our heads. None of us had been walking together, and there was no way we could have reached their side that quickly. The realization hit us all at once. If it wasn't any of us, then there were at least 3 other people out in those woods that night, one who attacked after my attacker. He might have saved me from an ambush. I insisted we needed to call the cops since I had literally been attacked. But Raz interrupted me, his demeanor suddenly serious. "No, we're not calling anyone," he said. When I asked what he meant, he explained he was technically grounded and wasn't allowed to host anyone while his parents were out of town. Involving the police would land him in serious trouble. I argued that this was a serious situation worth reporting, but he stood firm. The rest of the guys felt stuck. No one wanted to put Raz in a difficult position with his parents, but it was clear they were struggling to ignore what had happened. Eventually, I relented and agreed not to call the police, deciding we should just try to enjoy the rest of the night. Still, I was seriously shaken. I went to bed early that night and left Raz's house the next morning before anyone else woke up. This might surprise some of you, but I actually wasn't too affected by the experience. I believe that things happen and people have to move on, so that's what I did. About a week later, Raz mentioned he felt bad about leaving those Easter eggs out in the woods, so he went to collect them, even though he was terrified. We all had a good laugh, but it made me reflect on that night. I have no idea what those men were doing in the woods, but I can confidently say I won't be spending the night at Raz's place anytime soon. Now I'm in college, far away from Raz's backyard, but with Easter approaching next month, I was reminded of this story. This story takes me back to when I was a little kid, around 6 or 7. My family has always been deeply religious, which made Easter a significant occasion for us, much like our other major religious holidays. In fact, Sundays felt like special days too, thanks to how my parents treated church. It's amusing to think that some of my earliest memories revolve around church activities. What I want to share happened on Easter Sunday. The services that day were much longer than usual, but I didn't mind. My parents instilled a love for Christ in me from an early age. After the service, we had Sunday school, referred to as CCD, at our church. Many churches don't offer Sunday school after important masses, but ours did. After Mass, my parents took me downstairs to the classrooms as they had done countless times before, and I said my goodbyes. To help you understand the layout of the church, it had a split-level design. The main sanctuary was upstairs with the altar and pews, while all the classrooms were in the basement. Although it was technically a basement, the church was built on a slope, allowing access from that level too. There was a long carpeted hallway with about 7 or 8 rooms on each side, grouped by age. My classroom was one of the first on the left. At the end of the hall were 2 bathrooms, one for boys and one for girls. Next to them was a heavy gray door that led outside, usually locked from the inside. We were told it could only be used in emergencies. The adults always cautioned us against using that door, as it would lock behind us, leaving us unable to return inside. But back to my story. The entire downstairs was beautifully decorated for Easter, with pastel streamers, paper cutouts of lambs and crosses, and drawings of Jesus with children adorning the walls. Some teachers even wore those cheap bunny ears you find at CVS. It felt more festive down there than it had upstairs during the Mass. All the kids were in high spirits, likely excited about the egg hunts planned for later. Normally I would wait until class ended to use the bathroom, but after the unusually long Easter service, I couldn't hold it any longer. I raised my hand, asked to go, and the teacher kindly apologized to me. The bathrooms were just 15 feet down the hall, and it was common for kids to go by themselves. They always said if we took too long, someone would come check, but I don't recall that ever actually happening. So, I quietly slipped out while the rest of the class colored pictures of the empty tomb and Jesus rising from it. I entered the boys' bathroom and closed the stall door behind me. It was quiet, but those bathrooms were old. All I could hear was the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and a faint teacher's voice echoing down the hallway. As I sat there, I suddenly heard a strange scraping sound coming from the stall next to mine. It didn't sound normal, nothing like someone shifting or unlocking a door. It was a slow, uneven metal noise, like something was being dragged or scraped against the inside of the door. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp. I didn't feel scared, I was mostly just confused. At first, I thought it was another kid, so I kept quiet and finished up my business. While washing my hands, I glanced in the mirror and saw the stall door opening slowly. But instead of another kid stepping out, it was a grown man in an Easter bunny costume. I remember how the ears flopped forward and how the suit looked off saggy and stained, as if it hadn't been washed in ages. The fur was a grayish white rather than bright white, and one of the eyes looked like it had been sewn back on crooked. Oddly enough, I didn't feel scared when I saw him, not at that moment. I was young, and in my mind, this was just the Easter bunny making a surprise visit. I smiled when I turned around and thought I even said hi. He didn't respond at first, just stood there halfway out of the stall, staring at me. His head was tilted slightly, and he didn't move. I felt a bit awkward, unsure if I should say something else. Then, after a long pause, he stepped all the way out and slowly raised one arm, pointing toward the door as if he were guiding me out. That's when he finally spoke, his voice muffled behind the costume. But I still remember the exact words he said. "You're the lucky chosen child. I have a gift for you outside." I didn't hesitate. I was genuinely excited at the thought of being selected for a special Easter surprise. The fact that this was happening in my church gave me a false sense of security. I pushed open the big gray door without a second thought, forgetting that it was supposed to stay locked. The Easter bunny followed right behind me, not saying anything else. As we walked across the pavement toward the far corner of the church parking lot, there was a car parked back there, mostly hidden from view by a dumpster and some scraggly bushes. I thought it was strange that he had parked so far away and didn't even have a basket of candy. At one point, he took my hand, and we were maybe halfway across the lot when I saw a second Easter bunny stepping out of the car he was leading me to. I stopped walking, confused. I looked back and forth between the two of them, realizing that I hadn't seen that car earlier. Now there were two Easter bunnies, and something about it felt wrong. To this day, I believe what happened next was an act of God. One of the teachers, I think her name was Miss Sabrina, happened to be walking around the church, maybe preparing for the egg hunt or checking on something outside. She glanced over at the parking lot, just as I was being led toward the car. I'll never forget the sound she made. It was the most terrifying scream I've ever heard. The man in the costume immediately let go of my hand and dashed for the car. Without thinking, I ran in the opposite direction toward Miss Sabrina. Once I was safe in her arms, I turned just in time to see the car speeding out of the parking lot. I'm not entirely sure, but I think I saw another kid in the back seat of that car. Miss Sabrina wasn't looking, but I told her what I had seen, and she took me seriously. The next few hours are a bit blurry. Miss Sabrina alerted the other adults right away, and the police eventually made me recount what happened. They asked about the kid I mentioned in the back seat, and I did my best to describe him, even though I had only glimpsed him for a second and wasn't sure if my mind was playing tricks on me. My parents were understandably upset. I think my mom cried for an hour straight when we got home. The police followed up with the church, but nothing came of it. There were no missing children in the area, so they didn't have much to go on. The prevailing theory was that whoever was in that costume had a key to the back door and had waited in the bathroom for a kid to use it. Unfortunately, that kid happened to be me. I still find the whole experience deeply unsettling. Whoever did that must have been familiar with the church's layout. Otherwise, they wouldn't have known where to park or how to escape unnoticed. But what scares me the most is the thought that there really was a kid in the backseat of that car. It's hard for Easter to pass without me reflecting on this experience. Every Easter, my extended family makes the trip to Uncle John's house, deep in the countryside. This past year was no exception. Uncle John lives in a large house on a wide-open stretch of land, surrounded by woods. Despite visiting many times, I had never ventured into the woods behind his house. I'm not much of a nature person, so I've never been interested in exploring. To be honest, I was dreading the trip. I often feel out of place with that side of my family. They're all into hunting, fishing, and outdoor activities, and most have lived in the same area their entire lives. I tend to feel like the odd one out, especially since most of my cousins are much older, and many are already married with kids or working on farms. The only cousin close to my age is Kevin, a couple of years older than me, and pretty laid back. We usually stick together during these family gatherings, as he understands I don't quite fit in with the rest. We drove to Uncle John's late Friday night. As an only child, it was just my parents and me in the car, and I was exhausted from the drive, so I went to bed almost immediately. The next morning, Kevin and I spent a couple of hours in the basement playing pool. Neither of us was good at it, but it was better than sitting upstairs with the crowded chaos of relatives. There was no TV down there, so Kevin played music from his phone while we chatted about some trivial family drama that isn't worth mentioning. Kevin kept raving about the woods behind Uncle John's house, saying they stretched for miles and that few people ventured far enough to see the cool stuff out there. He described it as magical and beautiful in its isolation. I mostly nodded along. Nature wasn't really my thing, but I could tell he was passionate about it. Eventually, Kevin convinced me to join him on a nature walk. I wasn't keen on it, but I was bored out of my mind, which likely led to my agreement. We told Uncle John where we were headed. He's a nice guy who lets us younger folks do what we want, a mindset I wish my parents shared. Kevin took the lead, navigating across the backyard and into the trees like he had done it 100 times before. The woods were dense but not entirely wild, with a natural path that Kevin followed confidently. It wasn't late in the day, so I wasn't too worried about losing daylight, but as we ventured deeper, I began to wonder how we would find our way back. After about 20 minutes of walking, I asked Kevin if he was sure he knew where we were. He just laughed, assuring me he knew these woods like the back of his hand, having explored them since childhood. We continued for another 20 minutes when we both suddenly stopped. A loud thunk echoed from up ahead, like something heavy striking wood. It didn't sound like an animal or someone stepping on a branch. It was rhythmic, with pauses between each hit, resembling a hammer or mallet driving against a tree. Kevin looked at me, clearly puzzled too. The sound didn't seem too close, but it was loud enough to be distinct. He suggested it might be a hunter, but he looked a bit startled. Eventually the noise stopped. I asked if he wanted to turn back, but he shook his head. Curiosity got the better of us, so we kept walking toward the sound, both on high alert. A few minutes later, Kevin suddenly stopped and held his arm out in front of me. I froze, thinking he might have seen someone, but he pointed up into the trees. At first, I didn't understand, but then I saw 3 upside-down crosses nailed into 3 adjacent trees, easily 15 or 20 feet off the ground, far out of reach, without a ladder. Before we could turn to leave, I caught a movement out of the corner of my eye. To my horror, a man stood there, dressed like a lumberjack with a thick beard and a dark stare. Kevin stepped in front of me, partially shielding me from view. The man locked eyes with me and said, "You shouldn't be here." Kevin quickly apologized and told him we were just leaving, which we did. The man didn't move as we made our way back. He simply stared at us down. I could feel my hands trembling. We walked back in silence, and it was the tensest moment I've ever experienced. We kept glancing back, trying to see if we were being followed, but there was no way to tell. When we finally reached the house, we told Uncle John what had happened. He's a friendly guy who knows all his neighbors, so I felt a sickening twist in my stomach when he said he didn't know anyone who matched our description. He asked several times if we had been followed, and we insisted we hadn't. There wasn't much else we could do. Someone suggested arming up and sweeping the woods, but Uncle John wanted to avoid confrontation and didn't want to lead anyone to his house. So Kevin and I went back downstairs to relax while the rest of our relatives returned to their plans for the Easter festivities. That encounter played on my mind far more than I let on. I ended up going to bed early just to get my thoughts off it. But because of that, I woke up way earlier than usual, way earlier. I rolled over, checked my phone, and saw it was just after 5 a.m. The sun had just started to peek over the horizon, but it was still mostly dark outside. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't, so I decided to get an early start to my day. Uncle John has a study on the 3rd floor, so I went up there hoping to find some interesting books to read. The study has a large old window that overlooks the entire backyard. As I walked past it, something caught my eye, a faint flickering glow coming from the edge of the woods. It looked like the pulsing light of a small fire, not a flashlight or anything that bright. I stood there for about 30 seconds, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Curiosity got the better of me, and I needed to investigate, so I went downstairs and stepped out onto the back deck. When I realized what I was looking at, I nearly screamed. There were at least 3 figures standing just beyond the edge of the woods, each holding a small torch. They weren't moving, they were just standing there, facing the house, facing me. I ran straight to Uncle John's room and woke him up, telling him what I saw. Without hesitation, he grabbed his rifle, threw on a pair of pants, and told me to stay inside. He marched out onto the back deck and scanned the yard while I watched from the doorway. By that time, those figures had retreated back into the woods. Without a second thought, he aimed his rifle into the air and fired 3 times. That woke up the whole house, and the next 20 minutes were complete chaos. I can't think of a worse way to spend an Easter morning. The whole holiday felt ruined after that, and everyone was on edge for the rest of the day. Eventually, it was time for my parents and me to leave, and I can't say I was upset about it. This was about 9 months ago, and Uncle John has since told us he hasn't seen or experienced anything strange. Still, I would hate to live in that house knowing there are people lurking nearby. I'll send an update if Uncle John shares anything noteworthy. Did you enjoy this content? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Support us with a like and subscribe so our channel can reach more people. Thanks for watching until the end.